Hi, and welcome to the Unhinged History Podcast, the podcast where two people compulsively learn history and then attempt to make sure the other person has never heard it before and then tell it to you live. Not live,
Even
recorded.
if that means we called the other one's husband first.
Stop it. Stop it. Just because you know that I did that.
I think it's a good thing.
I mean, I might be just a bit more nervous about it than you are.
I am dying to know why.
Why that I'm nervous about it?
Yeah.
Oh no, I haven't gotten to the bottom of that. My therapist and I have a list of other things that we're focusing on that feel like a higher priority rather than that compulsive nature.
Oh, well, okay. You do you, I guess.
I mean, I have to, I suppose, because doing somebody else, I have comments on that. I'm not going to continue out that thought. Um,
Really?
I mean, I am married, so there are
That is an option.
that is. Um,
My goodness. I'm Angie. That's Theresa.
oh hey, we should do that part, huh?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got it.
Nearly a year's worth of episodes, and the intro is still where we just fall on our faces. So I've got that going for me.
Hey, winning.
But I do want to say that I don't know how much intro small talk you want to do. I have a one that I should I need a palate cleanser. I should not be the one to go
Okay.
last.
Okay, because trust me, my story is a palate cleanser.
Oh, thank God. You know what? I feel like I can ask that from you and not
You got it.
expect it, but damn near.
I mean, it's pretty safe to say you could expect it because I feel like every time I've told you a story that maybe wasn't a palate cleanser, I asked ahead of time, is this okay?
Right. Like, oh dear, I am venturing into unknown territory.
I may have mentioned murder.
Mm. Yeah, and I mentioned murder in my sources several times.
Well, we all have a skill set.
I mean, you know what? Look, I okay. So, can I just start?
Yeah, I am here
Okay.
for it.
All
Don't
right.
don't mind me. I'm just sorting myself out.
Thank God. So my sources are a book that I have now read twice because I read it when it came out and then I had to compulsively reread it so that I could cover this.
Okay.
And the reason why I asked you, well, I reached out to your husband, the man, is I asked if you guys had seen or were planning on going to the movie theater to see Killers of the Flower Moon. And he had said no. And I went, good. Because my sources are Killers of the Flower Moon, the book, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Gran, History.com, The FBI's First Big Case, The Osage Murders by Christopher Klein, the National Park Service, they have a page on the Osage. Um, the podcast Serial Killers, The Osage Murders, Parts 1 and 2, History.com, How Marriage and Murder Were Used to Steal Osage Oil Riches by Vincent Schilling.
Okay.
And this was one of those stories that when the book first came out and I read it, I went, oh my God, 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 oh my God. And then I have been really struggling with telling you this story. And so I haven't. And then I realized, oh my gosh, it's in theaters. I need to get off my tuchus and actually tell you the story so that you don't accidentally go to the movie theater and go, oh, that's a real story. Like, so this is nothing but spoilers.
So you're giving me the cliff notes.
I mean, if you knew the history, you'd still want to see the movie because it's got like Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro and
I mean,
our
it
boy
looks
Brendan
amazing.
Fraser.
I almost wore my mummy shirt today.
Little did you know I was going to come at you with a William or a Brendan Fraser.
Yeah,
Um,
you hit me like that.
I know. Okay, so let me just start by saying in 1872, there was a tribe named the Osage that relinquished most of their lands due to white settlers encroaching on them. And so they decide that they're going to purchase and settle near the Cherokee in what is now Oklahoma. And when the Osage realized that they would need to resettle, they chose land that was so unappealing to the white man. It was rocky, it wasn't flat, it didn't seem suitable for farming. They just didn't want to lose their land again.
I mean, that's fair.
Right? Like they're like, look, this sucks. So we're going to make the best that we can. They end up buying 1.5 million acres. And
Get it.
because the land wasn't allocated for them, it gave them more ownership and more rights, particularly when the US goes to make Oklahoma a state, they enter into negotiations with the Osage. And a lawyer for the Osage slips in this provision giving the Osage mineral rights, should any exist.
Okay.
And then an Osage man found an oil sheen on the water in the reservation.
Oh no.
And so the Osage start leasing the rights to drill for oil on the reservation. And all the proceeds to these leases are divided into quarterly payments among all the members of the tribe who had what was called head rights, or, basically like they were getting
Memberships. Yeah.
exactly. And these head rights, they'd set it up to where they could only be inherited. They couldn't be bought or sold. And this was to keep non-Indigenous members from obtaining them.
Okay.
So this tribe really did a very good job at trying to protect its own interests,
Good for them.
which I am so excited for, when you hear about this. And so then it's now 1921, roughly just after they've struck oil and are starting to, sell these oil rights. And the federal government decides that they're going to pass a law requiring the Osage members to, quote, prove competency with money or else be assigned a financial guardian. So do you remember how
Oh, we talked
last
about
week
this the other
and
day.
how I was a little hot under the collar? It was because like this was in my brain and I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. So lawyers poured into the region eager to, serve or, just skim, steal, whatever.
Whatever.
A 1924 study by the Indian Rights Association, a policy and advocacy group founded by non-Indians, estimated that the Guardians at that point had stolen at least 8 million directly from the accounts of their Osage wards.
Wow.
And that's not even in today's money.
Of
You know what I
course it's
mean?
not.
You
Yeah.
hear that, you're like, oh, So in David Grand's book, he documents how Guardians dictated how and from whom the Osage were allowed to buy. And this was down to the brand of toothpaste.
That is stupid.
And many of the Guardians would receive kickbacks from the shopkeepers by directing how the money spent.
Of course.
These guardianships were given or sold to prominent families in exchange for votes, in exchange, like for bribes. Like this was just ridiculous.
Infuriating.
Oh, and so the competency to have guardianship, if you proved competency, it's actually not necessarily linked to your financial acuity. It's directly linked to the amount of Indigenous blood that you have. So if you are
So,
100% Indian, the chance of you being found competent, near zero.
okay, that's what. Thank you for explaining it that way. That's what I thought you meant, but I was thinking, well, maybe I'm actually reading this backwards.
No, no. So that's the backdrop that we're working with.
Right. Okay, so the less Indian you are, the more competent you are. So, do you have to like I'm assuming if you want to spend your money that your tribe earned, you had to go out and ask for a guardianship? Like, how does
No,
that
the
work?
guardianships were assigned, but then you had to go to your guardian and you had to be like, "Hey, I need to buy food for my family. I need to buy a new car." And let's say it's a car. Your guardian would say, "Well, I will buy the car for you. I'm going to go to this lot. I'm going to spend $500 to get you a new car, but I will sell it to you for 1,500."
Oh my God, that's infuriating. Okay.
And this includes veterans of World War One, very similar to our boy from last week.
I'm so mad. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So if that's got you hot under the collar, just wait. There's more.
Oh. But wait, there's more. For $9.99.
Mm-hmm. So during the 1920s, the oil-rich Osage Indians in Oklahoma keep mysteriously dying. And it's during that period that it's come to be called the Reign of Terror. One report from the FBI believes that hundreds and hundreds were murdered. In a nation where Indigenous people faced rampant discrimination, tribal leaders struggled to find answers or justice, and ultimately, the brand new Bureau of Investigation, which would become the Federal Bureau of Investigation, under its newly appointed director J. Edgar Hoover, took the case and uncovered a shocking conspiracy.
A shocking conspiracy?
Oh, no,
Never.
we haven't even gotten to the conspiracy part yet.
Oh my.
You say that, and I'm like, girl, just you wait. Okay, so one by one in the early 1920s, Molly Burkhart's family members kept turning up dead. Her sister Anna had been discovered in a ravine in May of 1921 with a bullet wound to the back of her head. Following the shooting of a cousin less than 2 years later, Molly's sister Rita and her husband were killed in an explosion that reduced their house to kindling. And so Molly suspected that poisoning was to blame for an unexpected ailment that killed her mother. And in retrospect, even the wasting illness that had killed her third sister, Minnie, in 1918 seemed suspicious.
Okay.
So we've got a bunch of people who've died, a bunch of different MOs. And it wasn't just Molly's family that was being methodically killed on the Osage Nation reservation during that decade. There's more than 24 Osage tribe members that had been shot, stabbed, beaten, and bombed in what is one of the bloodiest crime sprees in American history. And this doesn't include the suspected poisonings or those who die of wasting disease or that were uninvestigated suicides.
Wow, okay. And just so I have some clarification, what year was oil found there?
1921.
And her sister died in 1918, you said?
1918. Well, was it
Okay.
1921? Now that I say that, it was in that area. Let me Google.
I feel like you said 1921. That's why I asked, because I was like 1918 is a couple years before 1921.
Okay, so I was wrong. It was 1897 that the first oil well was put in.
Okay.
Okay, so that was, thank you for asking for clarification. So it had fully ramped up by that point. And once it really got, then it was.
Okay. I understand the chain of events.
Yeah. So as soon as these Osage start becoming incredibly wealthy, guardianships are put on all of them. And then, people start dying. So
weird.
Incredibly, investigators who probe the case too deeply also have a propensity for turning up dead. Surprise.
Yeah, I'm not even a little bit, actually.
Yeah. One attorney with information on the case is thrown off of a speeding train.
That's natural. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the CDC talks about that all the time.
Yeah, you hear about it all the time. Well, if you live in Florida, you hear about it all the time, nowhere else.
You know what? This checks. There's the body of Barney McBride, who's a wealthy white oilman. He agrees to go to Washington, D.C. to ask federal authorities to investigate the murders because he's just trying to help. Like there's very few white people who are like literal actual friends, even though they might all call themselves that. Well, he's found stripped, beaten, and stabbed more than 20 times in a Maryland culvert that the Washington Post called the most brutal in the crime annals in the district. And to be considered the most brutal in DC, I feel like is rather telling.
I would really think, especially then in that time too.
I don't know if it's ever been like the safe, quiet streets of DC. I mean, maybe back in Washington's day, when it was just farmland.
Yeah. Okay.
So this continues to just go downhill. And the journalist and author David Gran, who detailed all of this in his beautiful book in 2017, which is same as the movie, The Flowers of the Killer Moon. Um, it's now in theaters because it was directed by Martin Scorsese. And he says that, like, or it's one of the things is that the reservation was soaked in blood because it was awash in oil, which is a beautifully written line.
Yeah.
And it talks about how these people who are driven from their lands, they do everything they can to get to this rocky, barren reservation that promised to yield very little except for their desire to be left alone. And that's until the discovery of one of the largest oil deposits in the United States.
That
And
checks.
oil barons such as J. Paul Getty, Henry Sinclair, and Frank Phillips. You know all of these people. You don't. I'm being a smartass. Paid grand sums.
I personally know Mr. Getty. Okay.
Congratulations. But they all end up paying like incredible sums for these leases and these outdoor auctions. And the auctions are held under what is this massive elm tree that's called the $1 Million Elm. And when the weather was beautiful, they would have this outdoor auction. And people would be poring over these maps to see what allotments they want to try to go for to drill. And each of the members, would receive these royalty payments on their head rights. And as the years progressed, so did the digits on their checks. So it started in 1897. And so it started by growing into the hundreds and then the thousands. And then in 1923 alone, the 2,000 tribe members collectively received $30 million.
Like the whole tribe.
So the whole tribe. So 2,000 people split up 30 million. And just to give you an idea, in today's money, that's $400 million.
Okay.
So this was not chump change. Now we see why the US felt the need to institute guardianships, like why this supplanted, I don't know, national security, public infrastructure, investing in schools.
Well, I mean, the dollar bill.
There's so many other things I would like them to legislate versus
I mean, I agree with
the wealth of 2,000 people.
Yeah. Like, we could probably leave them alone. They're just fine.
Literally. The Osage, because of this, they become the richest people per capita in the world.
Okay.
They live in mansions. They have chauffeured cars. They have servants, many of whom are white. And these images belie the longstanding stereotypes that Native Americans had since they could trace their first contact with whites. And it just really flipped everything we knew about them completely on their heads. Like in the book, it was like if the average family had one car, the Osage family had 11.
Okay.
Like it was just an obscene amount of wealth, right? I mean, and it all makes sense, right? I mean, you have the money. If you're a billionaire today, you don't have one car,
right?
Limited to one. You know what I mean?
I find it interesting that they were able to get mansions and chauffeured drivers and white staff and still have a guardianship. That's wild to me.
Yeah, it's really like it just shows just how obscene the whole system is.
Yeah, like I want to know what the house of the guardian looked like.
I mean,
if they're skimming off the top, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, it's probably not as luxurious or decadent, but it's probably not a shack.
Yeah, that's just what I'm thinking.
These families were the more prominent families in the community to begin with. So they were already doing well, but now they're able to take an addition too.
Right. That's crazy. Good on them. Good on them.
The Osage, not the whites, right?
Yes, the Osage.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I had a feeling that's where we were going, but I just want to double down on that.
Yes.
So the problem with all this great wealth is that it lured people who are just incredibly awful people, the desperados, the bootleggers, the criminals. And the bootleggers, because this is during Prohibition, they were pretty insidious. So in the book, it talks about how one of the undercover FBI agents goes to a bootlegger, and the bootlegger has all of this whiskey to sell, but he's like, oh yeah, don't buy the stuff over there. That's been basically laced with poison. That's what we sell to the Indians. You want the actual good whiskey over here. I mean, it is outrageous, outrageous at every step.
That's incredibly frustrating. I mean, I know that's just not enough to say, but especially during Prohibition when alcohol was already like the worst it could be as far as uh
You're just,
sanitary and health of
oh yeah,
people, Like let's just make it worse.
yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I'm mad.
No, I mean, and like another thing I didn't put in my story, but they talked about how when each of Molly Burkhart's family members passed away, the funeral arrangements were astronomically marked up.
Well, of course.
Like if you being a white person, for the full kit and caboodle, it would cost you $6,000. It would cost an Osage member 80.
I'd believe it.
And it's just really capitalizing on something very dark and insidious. And it really bugs me deep down in my soul. So this is just, these Osage Indians have become so rich that people felt that something had to be done about it. Like you just have to do something about it. You can't let them be better than you. I mean, and that was reported in Harper's Monthly, which that is how widespread the sentiment was. So prejudice provoked scapegoating the Osage and their wealth. And that's when the US Congress steps in to hold hearings about what the country should do in response.
Oh, yes. Let's hold some hearings. I love a good hearing.
Yeah. And that's when lawmakers appoint the white guardianships. And this system was so rooted in racism and under the pretense of enlightenment that the Osage needed protection. And even worse, it led to this entire criminal enterprise that had been sanctioned by the US government. The people who were appointed as guardians forced them to purchase goods at inflated prices and received kickbacks by directing them to do business with certain stores and banks. And in some cases, the guardians dropped the pretenses and simply stole the money.
Well, I mean, if you're going to do it.
Yeah. One government study says at least 8 million was sold or stolen. An exasperated Osage member says they're scalping our souls out here. And the systematic embezzlement was referred to as, quote, Indian business by white settlers on the Osage reservation. But even this wasn't lucrative enough. There had to be a better way to get more money.
Of course.
And since the head rights could only be inherited, there was a loophole that allowed calculated, cold-blooded jerks to gain the inheritance of tribe members by killing them. And some of them married their marks to legally become the next of kin before murdering their spouses.
I was going to ask, was it by marriage? Because that is the only way that the loophole would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That checks.
So as the body count rose in the early 1920s, the Osage saw no action from local and state law enforcement. There was a tremendous amount of corruption in the county, and the power structure was able to buy off lawmen. And in some cases, the lawmen directly were complicit, or they just simply turned a blind eye. And so this is when tribal representatives that's when the tribe sent representatives to Washington, where they appealed for help from President Calvin Coolidge. And then from the relatively new Bureau of Investigation. And they were seeking some high-profile success to erase the Bureau's stained reputation from the Teapot Dome scandal, which was a huge oil scandal that affected, I think that was Coolidge. Anyhow, but the Teapot Dome scandal was like a massive, huge scandal that went all the way up to the top of the government. And the newly appointed director, J. Edgar Hoover, he then sends some investigators to Oklahoma. And
okay,
Hoover was an interim bureaucrat that was put in. And so he's seeking to really bolster his own reputation so that he can hold on to that role and then
Right.
start amassing more and more power.
That checks.
Yeah. And this is about the time where he starts filling the bureau with these accountant looking investigators, where they all have the dark suits and they all
I was
have
just gonna say the suit and tie and
the government
yeah,
men, right? But
yeah.
before then, it was cobbled together, people from all over. Like one of the main investigators on this case is a man, Tom White, who is a former Texas Ranger and has done a ton of stuff, but he wears a cowboy hat. He's 6'3". Like he was like the
He is
second.
Walker, Texas Ranger.
Exactly. Like his daddy was a Texas lawman. He is a Texas lawman. And then he goes to the FBI. And it's just kind of insane when you think about, because for him, he's like, I need to bring people who look like they belong so they can bet in the community. Because if they look like a bunch of G-men, ain't nobody going to talk to them.
I mean, that's fair.
But
Super
strangely,
fair.
yeah. And like Hoover's whole thing was he wanted everybody to be copy paste. Like he wanted you to be able to go
The
from
Matrix.
the Atlanta field office to the Portland field office to the Oklahoma. Like he wanted them interchangeable. And White was like, you can't do that. These people need to be familiar with the territory.
That's also checks.
But anyhow, White gets his way. So he hands the case over, and the former Texas Ranger puts together this undercover team that includes literally or likely the only Native American agent they had.
Okay.
And it's incredible just hearing more about him. But I have to like try to pull in the reins of this so this podcast isn't 5 years long. They work quickly and methodically, and White pursued a case when many believed that the people they were pursuing were untouchable because they're white people and the victims were Native American. So,
Okay.
the public sentiment was, well, this looks like a victimless crime.
Oh, of course. It's like copying something off the TV.
Yeah, it's just like that. Just like making a
Interpol.
bad recording on your VHS. So White's able to crack the murders of Burkhart's family, Molly Burkhart. And he uncovers this insidious conspiracy that's promoted by a prominent cattle baron named William Hale. And
Why is
Hale,
it always the cattle baron?
I mean, it couldn't be because William's middle name is literally King, and he referred to himself as the King of Osage Hills.
Always. It is always the cattle baron.
I know. So Hale positions himself as a benevolent community leader and generous friend to the Indians. And that is said over and over in the book.
Of course, because that's what the Baron King says.
Yep. So Hale encourages his nephew, Ernest Burkhart, to marry Molly, and then methodically arranges to have her kin murdered.
Of course, of course.
And the order in which they go is important because it's first Molly's sister. So her head rights go to the mom. Like the sister without kids.
Molly's mom?
Yeah, to Molly's mom.
Okay.
And then the second sister gets shot. And those rights revert back to the mom.
Okay.
And then the younger sister's house explodes. And so those rights revert to mom. And then mom dies.
I'm going to assume dad's already dead?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He died I think well before even the oil came.
Gotcha.
And so mom inherits everything from the kids, and then mom dies. And so all the wealth is funneled to Molly Burkhart and her white husband and nephew of the cattle baron.
I find it interesting that she would think that there were suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of her family and still married a white man.
Well, she married the white man and then these things started happening.
Oh,
And
I guess that's
what's
true. Yeah,
worse
that's
is
true.
when the
Okay.
sister ends up, so the first sister dies of wasting disease, and everyone goes, "Oh, that's so sad. She was so healthy." And then she just died, like got sick and like stayed sick and died. And they're like, "Oh, it's wasting disease, whatever the hell wasting disease is." And then the second sister shot, and the investigation is so poorly handled. They lose the bullet that should have been trapped in the sister's skull. At some point, they lose the skull. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, and as all this is happening, her uncle-in-law, William Hale, he's like, I'm going to hire investigators to look in on this because we don't really have local and state authorities who are going to step in. So I'll hire a PI and I'll put out a reward and we'll get this taken care of. And so she thinks that her family, married family, is going to support her during this.
That's would be a fair assumption to make if he's saying these things.
And actually hiring an investigator. Now he's telling the investigator basically don't work too hard, but when you see these steps happening, you assume these things are happening. You
Yeah.
assume this is going the right direction. And you don't assume that the man who shares your bed and loves you is a part of it.
Yeah. Ugh.
Like at one point, her sister and brother-in-law hear people sneaking around their house at night. So they move into the neighborhood as Molly Burkhart. And within like a very short period of time, the brother and sister-in-law, Bob, is it Bob? I think it's Bob and Rita, their house blows up.
That's insane.
Like blows up to the point where they wake up to the explosion. Molly looks out the window and realizes that that's the direction of her sister's house. What's
That would be
even
Oh my gosh.
it
Yeah.
is
Okay.
so awful. And one of the most heartbreaking parts of the book was when Burkhart's grandchild talked about the bombing ordeal. He had said that Hale and Burkhart, they worked together to orchestrate bombing Bill and Rita Smith's house. That's what it was. And the night of the bombing, Molly and her kids, so Burkhart's wife and children, were planning on visiting and spending the night. But the son, Cowboy, that's his nickname, he has an earache and he doesn't go. And so Cowboy grows up wrestling with the knowledge that his dad tried to kill him.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to think on.
Right?
And how can you play along for so long that you have children?
So a man and a woman love each other very much. And
Yeah, no, I get how it's done. What I'm
I mean, how duplicitous you have to be
yeah,
to make
like
babies and then let your babies go to where,
yes, I mean yeah, okay. I'm just going to be quiet now. Carry on.
I mean, it is a love of money that supersedes everything else.
It makes me so mad.
And
I'm
what is so incredibly heartbreaking is when you look at, okay, I'm going to put a pin in that. Remind me to tell you about the fallout between Molly Burkhart and the tribe, because I got to circle back to this, but I got to hit a couple other points before I do. Beyond the Burkhart case, in which Molly and the kids end up being the only surviving members of her entire fucking family. This garners national attention. Many of the Osage killings remain unsolved, and Hoover's in a rush to close the case and really closes the case prematurely. The Bureau doesn't reveal the deeper, darker conspiracy. And as a result, many outside of that were able to escape justice. So in the book, Gran picks up the case and reveals how there was a wider conspiracy of the murders, which numbered in the hundreds. And it was really a culture of killing and a culture of complicity in these murders. And what makes the crime so sinister and disturbing, he says, is that it's a clash of two civilizations and the emergence of modern law enforcement and how important it is to be a country of laws. unlike state and local investigators, Hoover agents did provide the Osage with some relief from their reign of terror, but it also came with a bill of $20,000 for their services, where the Osage were expected to pay for the pleasure of having this case solved.
Now I'm not sure what makes me madder.
I, I don't think you have to limit yourself to just one. This can just be an entire bucket of anger.
It 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 really is, because do we not live in a country where that is something that we are supposed to be guaranteed?
Yeah, like what are the tax dollars for?
Yeah.
If to do this, I also get a $20,000 bill.
Yeah, that's infuriating. And I'm going to assume the $20,000 in 1925 to today is astronomical.
Well, let me look up with the inflation calculator because that is a number I didn't do.
Theresa didn't do an inflation
I
calculation?
had the opportunity and I didn't see it. What is wrong with me?
I say, because I did the math on my story.
You know what? I have thoughts.
Am I number one in your book?
That is a bill of $351,758.86.
That checks. Yeah, for justice.
Yeah. So between the years
And I'm
of,
sure there are already being taxed to hell and back.
oh, why
Like,
not?
yeah,
Why
I'm
not?
sure they are.
This was before we had the billionaires who figured out how to get out of paying taxes.
Ah, special. Okay. Sorry, I didn't
So
mean to interrupt.
between the years of 1907 and 1923, 605 Osage died. So that would put their death rates at 19 per 1,000 people. And the national death rates for today are 8.5 per 1,000. Oh, and these numbers, they only reflect people who were born before 1907 because those are the people present on the scrolls. So any Osage born after 1907 isn't listed in the numbers I just included above.
Oh, okay.
So, they're dying at 1.5 times higher rates than the average, but it's cool. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, okay. That checks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't spend your money. It's fine.
hmm
It's
But
gonna
I
sit here
do
and
have a
stew.
picture of Molly and her two sisters that I want
So
to
does
share with
Molly
you.
survive?
Molly survives. Molly survives. Okay, and I will go back to the okay, so this is Molly, and these are her two sisters. So because Molly married the notorious killer amongst them, she lost her entire family.
Of course.
And during the trial and after the trial, her family was more or less ostracized by the tribe, who had a hard time believing that she wasn't involved. Like,
Okay.
how are you married to the one who
Did the
wiped
thing.
out so many of us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid question. I mean,
Right.
she's obviously innocent, but it's a valid question that people would have.
Yeah.
That's rough.
But that is the story of the Osage murders as focused on Molly Burkhart and her family. Oh, and so, hundreds and hundreds of, people likely died in a result of this reign of terror, but the official toll is 24.
Oh, okay. Um, and it's crazy to know that there were more women out there with similar stories.
Yeah,
There has to
like
be.
in one Osage historian said they cannot find a single family who didn't lose at least one person.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, okay. Arr, I'm just gonna growl about it.
I know, I know. And it is so then I hear like Scorsese has produced this or directed this movie about this entire story. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. I need to go see it. I need to make sure everybody else goes sees it. Because it's a story that has lived rent free in my brain since I first put it there. And
And
like
now
I
here you are.
consumed the entire book a second time this weekend.
That's awesome. I consumed it. I love consuming books. It's
Yeah.
my favorite. Oh my. Ugh. Well, my story is definitely a palate cleanser.
See, I
Um,
told you we'd need it.
do we have time for it?
I think we do.
Okay.
Like, unless you say
Um,
like, let me pull out my tome of notes.
no, I have a tome of notes, but it's not they're not wild as far as like yeah, it's fine. Gonna tell you the story of the oh, first of all, I should say that this week's story is brought to you by my husband, um, who knows. I don't know if I don't, I'm unsure if I've shared with you, but I'm a huge fan of all things French. Did you know that? I think you knew that.
High fashion,
Yeah.
French things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Taquitos.
that's not French, but
Well, I'm just thinking about
taquitos.
just things that you are a connoisseur of, things that you
I
deeply
I
in
I do love
Pepsi.
taquitos and
I think
Pepsi.
that's the full circle.
It really is. Yeah, it truly is. Um, so he has this goal in life to make sure that he always hits me with fun French facts or little stories, delightful little ditties, if you will. And he hit me with this one the other day, and I was like, I have to tell I have to tell her this story right now. Um, so this is going to be the bakers and waiters strike of 1907. The right to a day off and a mustache.
Can I just say that 1907 is a very prominent year in my story too, so this is very entertaining to
I
me.
know. When you said that, I was like, shut up, Angie. Shut up, Angie. So just know that in 1907, on the other side of the world, waiters were going to bat for the right to wear a mustache.
You know, as somebody
Um,
who just removed mine, I can get behind these efforts.
so one of my sources is Atlas Obscura, which, believe it or not, came straight from my husband, who found the article there first. A book called Concerning Beards, Facial Hair, and Health and Practice in England in 1650 to 1900 by Dr. Alan Whitney. And probably my favorite source is the gentleman'sjournal.com, an article called A Brief Bristling History of the Mustache. And in order to tell you the history, or the story rather, of the right to wear a mustache, I have to tell you the history of facial hair because it's just not the same without it.
I feel like the history of facial hair is it exists.
It does, but the mustache in particular has a bit of a story. Did
Okay.
you know? I'm just going to start you off with some fun facts. Did you know that if you have a mustache, you inadvertently touch it over 700 times a day?
I
Yep.
had a feeling like, I mean, like I am constantly searching the mole for, phantom hairs. And then I'm also like, so I am like always
Yeah. So
checking,
imagine if there were actually hair there,
there
right?
is actually hair there and I am a scout.
Well, it's beautiful hair. Don't you don't need to worry about it. Um,
Luxurious.
it's luxurious. There is also a World Beard and Mustache Championship.
Oh, I knew that.
I did not, and I was so delighted to learn that. I'm sad I didn't already know that. Um, and according to the Gentleman's Journal, the word mustache starts in Greece as a mastax. Then it was stolen, the word itself was stolen by the Scottish and turned into mistax, meaning jaws, mouth, or lips. The medieval Greeks, playing no games about it, took the word back, and we got then the new word of mustachian, which, thank God for the Italian and the word mustachio, because they took over with that. And then the French combed it into submission, giving us what we now know today as the mustache.
Okay.
The final definition of the term mustache is the hair that grows on the upper lip of a man. Not a woman, just a man.
I have seen women with some damn impressive mustaches. I feel like we need to degender that one.
I was going to say this feels sexist. I'm just saying.
I mean, again, these these women were eye-catching. I will give them that.
Striking, if you will.
Definitely striking.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I can only imagine literally striking should you mention the mustache.
Okay, well, the gentleman's journal goes on to say, quote, the origins of the actual adornment are unfortunately not so clear. We know that some Egyptian statues shows pharaohs sporting the stash. The gallant knights of the Dark Ages also had armor custom made to accommodate their mustaches.
How
Um,
massive would your stash need to be that you need to shape your helmet differently?
well, I will show you in just a few minutes. So the helmets were created that would rustle the thick flowing facial hair. And we're also aware that the Hungarian Hussar cavalry units of the 18th century coupled their huge mustaches with outlandish uniforms in a bid to strike fear into the hearts of their bald-faced enemies.
Wow.
I know, isn't that glorious? So
These men
typically,
have mustaches. They're older than us.
oh no,
That was my attempt at imitating a prepubescent boy.
you did good. You did
Thank
great.
you. I
Yeah.
do what I can.
By the 18th century, if you saw a mustache, it was probably worn by a soldier, and they were commonly used to tell the difference between military men and your good old civilian. However, mustaches would get their real glory in the 19th century when the British Rajah was colonizing away. Indians believed, Indian from India,
From
well,
the Asia continent.
yes,
Okay.
believed that a man's facial hair is a sign of his innate virility, and so they were growing out their mustaches to, quote, assert their masculinity, which, as you can imagine, or at least I did, this would be the beginning of the hair farming wars. Bigger was
Hair
better.
hair farming?
Yeah, hair farming. That's a phrase for lots of hair.
Okay, because I was thinking like did it I mean my I automatically went to capitalism, so like are we
We're not selling it.
harvesting and then selling?
No, we're just growing mass
Just
amounts of
growing.
hair. Yeah, we're
Okay,
just
so
growing.
this is the equivalent of Hubs with the literal jade roller and particular products that he rolls into his face regions to stimulate
Hair growth.
growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I should really quit throwing his self-care under the bus because
Do you want to delete that part?
I mean, no, I will let him call me out and then I will know that he listens.
Okay. All right.
I
All
don't
right.
think that he does. This will be my test.
So the Gentleman's Journal has this to say about the bigger, better mustache. Quote, the British Army, many of whom were buying into the stiff, clean-shaven, upper-lipped sensibilities of the time, were having difficulty maintaining any order within the Indian troops, who considered them less than real men, given their disastrous lack of a mustache. Backed into a corner, the Brits fought back and took control with similarly big bristlers and brought the style back to Blighty with them when they returned home. The mustache returned from the Empire a conquering hairy hero.
So you say that, and now I'm wondering, I have this image in my brain of a cartoon of a British man with an incredibly thick red mustache. And I'm really hoping that you're conjuring the same image so that I know this isn't a fever dream and likely some
No, it's
actual
very real.
cartoon.
It's it might actually be a cartoon. I It sounds familiar to me. I'm thinking he's kind of a plump fellow.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're gonna have to find the guy because he is
Actually,
not in my picture.
I'm also like, I'm probably cobbling together several images because isn't the walrus from the original Alice in Wonderland? Doesn't he
You
also have the mustache and
I think
then
he
has a
does.
thick British accent?
I think he does, and it would be par for the Alice in Wonderland story. It would be perfect. The time,
Okay,
all of it. Yeah,
great. So
yeah.
perfect. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Carry on.
So there was a short time in World War One when facial hair was not all that popular because you couldn't fit it into a gas mask.
I could see that being a bit,
Bit of
I
a
like
thing.
living.
Yeah. But once the Roaring Twenties started rolling, the stashes started rocking it again. Once World War II was in swing, the British, quote, triumphed in more ways than one, with our rakish fighter pilots becoming known for both their bravery and their silky, sweepingly huge handlebars. This story makes me so happy.
I mean, this is exactly the palate cleanser we needed.
You're welcome. Um, and since then, they've never really fallen out of favor. I mean, not with the likes of men like Tom Selleck, Sam Elliott, Pedro Pascal. Like the mustache
The
is
best. Okay, so Grace and Frankie had the best Sam Elliott quote
okay. Hit me.
where Jane Fonda, referring to Sam Elliott, says, "There are 5 men who can pull off that mustache, and he's 3 of them."
I mean, that's accurate. That is so accurate. Would you like to see a couple of images of the mustaches from World War II? Because they're glorious.
World War II or one?
World War II. In World
Oh,
War
that's
One,
right. Because World
mustaches
War
were
One,
not
they
worn.
were the gas mask issues. Yes, I'm
In
here for
fact.
it.
Okay. Allow me to to share this with you because they're phenomenal.
Okay, so Angie has found an image of, I mean, while some would refer to it as handlebars, I would prefer to them as airplane wings.
Yep.
There is
There's
I would assume general, there is hardly an unmetalled portion on his entire visage from shoulders to legs. I mean, he is covered in ribbons,
I
and
think he might actually be a Japanese general, which makes
I'm
it even funner.
I don't know, but either way, he's got a white handlebar mustache that goes down to his mutton chops and extends, I'm not kidding, 1.5 feet on either side.
He's glorious.
But he does have ambiguous ethnicity.
If I remember right, the page that I took this from mentioned him being a Japanese general of sorts. I don't remember his name though. I was just so in love with his mustache that I had to share. And then you see the happy American gentleman. Oh, he's either American or British, but I think this one was American with the
Okay, so
pipe.
either way, there's a
Much
European
smaller.
man. He's in a I'd say fur coat, but very short fur coat, not like the very long, luxurious mink. He's
It's a
got a
bomber's
scarf.
pilot coat.
Oh, is that what that is? Okay.
Yeah.
He's literally got a corncob pipe. He looks kind of like a hipster with his haircut. Like he could be making your coffee behind the counter at an upscale craft place. Um,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant teeth. His mustache is what you would assume is like the hipster mustache with, the nice sweep, but it goes only up to the corners of his smile, which is quite dapper.
Isn't he? All right. So then for my final picture, because this guy. Okay, you see this guy?
Okay. So
Okay, go
she's now
ahead.
showing me a picture of a man who looks like he's wearing like a flight jacket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's in his
Um,
flight suit.
yeah, flight suit. And he's got like the airman hat on, so I don't know how else to describe what that is. He's
It's
got
it's not the beret, but I always forget what this one's called.
Yeah, I don't
The
know. I don't know,
more
but
it's an airman's hat. Yeah,
it's an airman's hat. Um he has honestly impressive forearm hair that is because he has his finger up in the camera, like, don't you dare. Um, but his mustache is that very thick 60s style, like
Tom Selleck.
exactly. But that's not Tom Selleck.
No, it's not Tom Selleck, but he reminds me of Tom Selleck.
You're not wrong. I see where you're getting that.
So this man and that mustache is against regulation. So this man is called Robin Olds, and he is a bit of a legend. He uses his mustache for some light rebellion, if you will. Um, Olds was known for his extravagantly waxed and very non-regulation handlebar mustache. He sported it in Vietnam, and the airmen. So there was a common superstition. Excuse me if I could say the word. Among airmen, there was a superstition that like you needed to grow a bulletproof mustache, is what they called the handlebar mustache that Mr. Olds you saw had.
Yeah.
Um, However, he uses his as, quote, a gesture of defiance. He says the kids on base, they loved it. Everybody grew a mustache. He started growing his in the wake of a successful operation called Operation Bolo, and he let it grow beyond regulation length. Kind of because, quote, it was the middle finger I couldn't raise in the PR photos. The mustache became my silent last word in the verbal battles with higher headquarters on rules, targets, and fighting the war.
I love
Love
that.
this man.
So at my
Go ahead.
grandfather's memorial, I learned of something he did to break regulation and to be out of uniform. And it's actually how he met his best friend.
That's awesome.
So he's seated for some kind of briefing with everybody else in his group
Unit.
unit. And the commanding officer, because he's sitting cross-legged, and they had to wear the specific socks. And Gramps was sitting cross-legged, so his pant leg rose up. And his commanding officer said, Rick, he's like, are you wearing Argyle socks that don't even match? And my
I will
grandfather
not be
looks down.
stopped.
He looks down and looks at his socks and he goes, well, would you know it? I have a pair that look just like this at home. And that's when the guy who would be his best friend goes, yeah, I should be friends with that man.
I mean,
to be that much of a smart ass, to be like, oh, they don't match. Oh, I've got a matching pair at home.
they're there.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that guy. How fun.
That is
Uh,
great.
so funny enough, he is the legend behind Mustache March. It's in which aircrew, aircraft maintainers, and other airmen worldwide show solidarity by a symbolic, albeit, quote, good-natured protest for 1 month against the Air Force facial hair regulations. He's the reason that exists. You get Mustache March because of that man. And I could go on and on and on and on and on about this guy, but I actually told you all of that so I could tell you about the Great French Mustache Strike of 1907.
This was all Lita.
Yep.
Angie, you bury the lead every single time.
It's so much fun.
I'm going to tell you about straws just so I can get to bourbon.
It's true. And now I'm going to tell you about mustaches so I can tell you about a waiter strike. So at 6:30 p.m. on April 17th in 1907, waiters all over Paris stopped serving, shut up shop, collected their pay, and went home. The customers were needless to say, befuddled, confused, if you will. The waiters were later mocked the following day in the press because striking is something a miner or a railroad worker would do, but not a waiter. But by this point, several other service-type industry workers were on board, such as bakery workers, butcher boys, public servants, and school teachers, and they wanted rights. I mean, that's what it was all about. Atlas Obscura has a great comment, sort of bringing it all around, saying, quote, around the city at the time, high-end waiters were on strike to demand better pay, more time off, and the right to grow a mustache. The bristly adornments had been virtually ubiquitous among Frenchmen for decades, though many waiters, domestic servants, and priests were not allowed to have them. They were sentenced to forced shaving.
Wait a minute. What do we want? Wages. When do we want it? Mustaches. What?
Yeah.
We also want
Yeah.
mustaches.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, you're not far from the truth here. It's estimated that when they walked off the job, so did 25,000 francs a day.
I mean,
in
this
revenue.
checks.
So 5 francs was the equivalent of $1 back in 1907. In US dollars today, that's roughly $818,000 a day. So
It's not chump
people,
change.
people have a reason to figure this out. My favorite part of the whole story, though, is that a newspaper called the Memorial de la Lorraine said, quote, women are quite determined to starve with their children rather than see the whiskers of their husbands still fall under the razor. And if that doesn't tell you how much a woman loves facial hair, I don't know what else will.
Honey, I don't agree with this reporter. I like eating. I like our children breathing.
Please and thank you.
I like them above ground. Just
Thank you.
just a razor. I mean, I'm just asking for us to continue living.
I would like bread this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So I
the
don't know if I
waiters,
agree with that, but that does seem a bit hyperbolic. Anyhow, carry on.
yeah, there you have it. The waiters who stayed on and continued working, they were not treated well and were most definitely berated by the strikers who wanted them, on the picket line with them. The police had to respond by moving all of the clean shaven men and about a dozen super confused American tourists who had no clue what was going on. And I just think that's so American and so funny. Like, we're here for a day in Paris. We don't know why we're being thrown out, but
I
here
mean,
we are.
it doesn't matter the day, the time, the reason. There's always going to be confused tourists wandering around the city.
This particular time, they just happened to be shuffled in with a group of clean shaven men who didn't want to not work that day.
Yeah.
So the demand to wear facial hair was different from waiter to waiter, but it seems that it was more about the injustice of the time. Alice Obscura and my other sources go on to talk about the history of the mustache and its status symbol. Basically, it's a symbol of privilege, and even points out that by the middle of the 19th century, most French soldiers had to wear mustaches. Some in the
Had
lower
to.
ranks, yeah, they were required to. Um, Though in the lower ranks, to reinforce the military hierarchy, the lower ranks weren't allowed to. But the requirement was so strict that some soldiers who couldn't grow facial hair naturally had to stick on fakes.
You hear of
This
like
is France.
previous wars of like women disguising their gender to join the war. I think this would cause or a lot more people to be visibly non-gender conforming if they had the mustache requirement, or there'd be more people just growing out their armpit hair and pasting it to their upper lip.
I mean, whatever. You do you. Um, so around the time that the French military is got this hierarchy of mustache wearing is also when the first modern restaurants are rising up around Paris. So these establishments, they're clearly primarily for the wealthy, and they wanted to recreate that whole experience of dining a la Downton Abbey, where you have your butlers and your valets and all that good stuff. So for them, the experience was also about food, but more about the experience. Waiters had to retain the appearance of domestic valets, whatever, who were forbidden to wear mustaches as a sign of their rank. Diners were, quote, paying to humiliate people in a most institutional way, says historian Gil Milhaley, who has published extensively on the subject of French masculinity. The clientele paid for an experience, and the experience was to be the master. So it goes without saying that this was a way for the wealthy to hold on to their status after the expansion and industrial revolution gives way for more people of the working class to have access to the same luxuries that only the upper class formerly had, right?
Right.
But saying that made me think not all upper class men served in the military, but they would wear mustaches. So I wondered if, even if they didn't serve, were they given a hard time for sporting the look? Or was it very much like oh, well, you're the upper echelon, you're the one percenter, so who cares? You can have the mustache. It's just part of your status symbol. I'm unclear on that. But there you have it. So all that to say, while the waiters did have a union, it is possible that some of their grievances, like having a day off and better pay, were settled with the individual employer. But it is also believed that it could have been thousands of the working class walking off the job during this time. Waiters just happened to be the forefront.
Either way, though, what a
Right? Opponents, and I imagine this little bit I'm going to read to you. I imagine this to come out of the mouth of those snooty upper ladies. Oh, Thomas, those type.
the Dowager Countess from Downton
Yes,
Abbey. I'm
yes.
Maggie Smith is reading the following.
My God, I love that woman. Still, others argued against the movement due to hygienic concerns, which, according to Old Stone Moor were beginning to appear more frequently. Will they clean rather frequently their mustaches? Asked in the Le Journal on April 22nd. From their nostrils to our drinks, the paper warned bacteria wouldn't need to travel far to our, quote, stomachs, kidneys, and most delicate organ parts.
So,
Plus,
what are they expecting these mustaches to do? Like just their sheer presence? Like,
their sheer presence is going to get you sick. Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
their husbands' mustaches don't? I'm
I literally said the same thing when I was reading through this. Um, the article also argues that, quote, the hair appendix is not so convenient. It complicates life. Watching a mustache man eat, certainly a common sight in the day's restaurants, regardless of the appearance of the wait staff, is, quote, repugnant.
repugnant.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to let Hubs know that his mustache is repugnant.
Only when he eats. Otherwise, it is a symbol of his status in life.
Although I will say, speaking of only when he eats, he is not necessarily a fan of sandwiches because he ends up eating his hair.
Okay.
And I'm like, this checks. I understand that. Okay.
We just cut it off right there. Like Ian starts above his lips so that he can eat.
I haven't gotten into that with him. I've just like, all right, if that's the way you wear your body and that one food thing bothers you, okay.
There you go. So the waiters' defendants saw this as a way to show their freedom, stating that they are free men with no king and no master and should most definitely be able to wear the stash. Interestingly enough, though, there was already a bill in Parliament banning mustache bans
A
by the
ban
time
to
it all
ban
started.
them.
Yep, by the time it all started, but the bill failed, which wouldn't matter because by May they won the right to properly wear their stash, probably at the expense of other demands, but the mustache was the big one, and I just think that is delightful.
Look, we don't get any days off, and our pay is actually $1 lower, but we get a
But
mustache.
so I would like to end with this statement that was made by the historian Gil Muhali. It was very painful for those who were forced to shave, he says. The mustache bans were especially demoralizing for veterans who had to abandon proud symbols of their service just to qualify for certain jobs. To be denied the mustache was to be demeaned, infantilized, emasculated, even depatriated in front of their families, neighbors, and friends. Nothing paints a clearer picture of this than Guy de I'm going to jack this up. I have said it to myself 100 times. Guy de Maupassant's 1883 short story called The Mustache, in which a woman named Jean mourns the mustache her husband had to shave in order to take on a female role in a play. Quote, a man without a mustache is no longer a man, she laments. Perhaps worse, he lacks the insignia of our national character.
So wait a minute. She wanted him to play a woman with the mustache? Is that what I'm understanding? Like, because that seems
Yeah,
to be the alternative.
that is the alternative. I think she was just more upset that the mustache was gone. Um, so yeah, there's there's the story of the mustache rebellion and the history of the mustache in short, sweet, palate cleansing way.
I deeply respect your contributions to this podcast.
I literally was like, hold on, you mean to tell me a whole group of waiters? This sounds so French. Let's do it. Like, if we're not going to be able to wear the mustache that you wear, then we're just not going to serve you.
I mean, to
It
be
reminded
fair,
me.
I'm surprised that, they ever got waiters with that rule.
I mean, yeah, well, I guess that's true when you think about it, but at the same time, a job is a job. And I'm sure that by 1907, the tension in the world that was already building just kind of reared its head as a mustache riot, if you will. Riot's not the right word. A mustache strike. It's funny what humans will pick as their symbol, for lack of a better word. This is what we're choosing to fight over, and it's going to be our mustache.
You're
That's
not
what I think
wrong.
anyway. I mean, you think about like the Industrial Revolution and everything that came with that. I'm sure that before that, when you were dining in a French restaurant, the waiter would have never thought about a mustache. That was just par for the course, or any restaurant for that matter. But there you have it, the history of the mustache strike of 1907. I keep
It's,
giggling because I've got the picture up of the general with the mustache.
I mean,
I
it is
can't.
such a silly thing that I just, it's delightful.
Yep, absolutely delightful. That's why I could not tell this story. It makes me so happy because my next story is equally delightful, but in a very different way.
Well, let's just record next week's episode.
I don't have my notes done.
That's fair. I had to get my notes together in a hurry because, yeah, like it all was in my brain. I was like pacing. I was like, but then there's this and then there's that.
And what about this?
Ugh.
I could
Well,
have gone
go
on
ahead.
more, but because I have one more character, but I think he's worthy of his own. His mustache is worthy of its own story.
Dang.
I know, right?
Well, if you've enjoyed this traipse through life and the bizarre recurrence of the year 1907 and can't wait to see what unintentional crossovers we bring next week, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends about the history of mustaches. Tell them to skip past my story if they're not looking for a buzzkill. And on that note, goodbye.
Or start with her story and end with mine.
Yeah, really get yourself super down and then come back up.
Yes, in fact.
All right. On that note, goodbye.
Bye.